The final burn was always the worst. It was a controlled fall, a multi-billion-dollar ballet of thrust and counter-thrust, and every time my stomach tried to climb out of my throat. Strapped into my command chair on the flight deck of the Pioneer 7, I kept my eyes glued to the telemetry, not the viewport. Data was my sanctuary. Numbers didn't lie, didn't have opinions. They were the pure, unvarnished truth. Altitude 20 miles and dropping. Entry interface is clean. She's flying like a dream, Claire. Hannah Cooper's voice crackled in my headset, as cool and steady as the ship's chronometer. She was the only one of us who truly lived in these moments. The rest of us just survived them. "Copy that, Hannah," I replied, my own voice a carefully modulated monotone. As Dr. Claire Dawson, Mission Commander-in-Chief Xenobiologist, calm was part of the job description. "Keep us appraised." "Roger that, Commander. Noah, how's our little Eden looking from down there?" "Oh, she's a beauty," Noah Ramirez chimed in from the science station behind me, his voice buzzing with the irrepressible energy of a kid in a candy store. "Atmospheric composition is a 99.4% match to the preliminary scans. Nitrogen, oxygen, trace argon. I could take my helmet off and go for a jog, if Walker would let me anyway." A low grunt came from the tactical station to my right. "Nobody's taking their helmet off until I've swept a 1-mile perimeter, and then another one after that." Ethan Walker, our head of security, was a creature of protocol and suspicion. A former Marine, he viewed every new world not as a discovery, but as a potential battlefield. "Vitals are stable across the board," Dr. Owen Brooks added, his voice the placid counterpoint to Ethan's grovel. "Though Noah's heart rate is approaching hummingbird territory. Deep breaths, son." The lander, the Stork, shuddered as it hit the lower atmosphere, the retro thrusters screaming to life. The G-forces pressed me into my seat, a familiar, heavy hand. I allowed myself a glance out the viewport. We were descending into a sea of green. Not the fractured, familiar patchwork of Earth's continents, but a solid, unbroken blanket of emerald, jade, and viridian. It was overwhelming. A planet painted in a single color. "Astrogenesis, this is Oasis 1. The Stork has landed," I said into the comms, the official words feeling small and inadequate. The automated reply was instantaneous, a sterile confirmation from a server half a galaxy away. "All right, people," Ethan's voice cut through the reverence. "Pressurization is stable. Exterior cameras are online. Let's see what we're dealing with." The main view screen flickered to life, and a collective breath hitched in the cabin. We were in a clearing, a perfect circle of mossy ground surrounded by a forest of giants. The trees were unlike anything I'd ever conceived. Their trunks were smooth and pale, like polished bone, spiraling hundreds of feet into the sky. But it was their bark that stole the air from my lungs. It was laced with veins of soft, chartreuse bioluminescence that pulsed in the slow, hypnotic rhythm like 1,000 sleeping hearts. The ground was a carpet of flowers that shimmered with an oily iridescence, their colors shifting from deep violet to crimson as the light from the pulsating trees washed over them. It was a place of impossible, aggressive beauty. "My God," Noah whispered. "It's perfect." "Too perfect," Ethan muttered, his eyes narrowed, scanning the edges of the screen. The ramp hissed open, lowering into the alien paradise. Protocol dictated that Ethan go first. He stood at the top of the ramp, rifle held at a low ready, his helmeted head sweeping from side to side. He took a step onto the mossy ground, then another. He knelt, his gloved hand touching the surface. "Ground is firm. No immediate threats detected. Air quality is clean, unnaturally clean. One by one, we followed him out. The air was warm, smelling of damp soil, chlorophyll, and something else, something vaguely sweet, like night-blooming jasmine. The gravity was a pleasant 90% of Earth's, making my movements feel light and effortless. I walked to the edge of the clearing, my boots sinking slightly into the springy, damp moss. I looked up at the canopy of those colossal trees, their glowing bark painting the sky in shades of green. And then I heard it. Or rather, I didn't. I strained my ears, waiting for a chirp of an insect, the call of a bird, the rustle of some small creature in the undergrowth. There was nothing. Only the whisper of a breeze through the giant paddle-shaped leaves high above, and the faint hum of our lander's power systems. The world was utterly, profoundly silent. "Ethan," I said, my voice quiet, "do you hear that?" He was already standing statue still, his rifle pointed towards the dense wall of trees. "I hear exactly nothing, Commander. No fauna, no insects, nothing."
"It's peaceful," Noah said, his helmet retracted, a look of pure wonder on his face. "It's wrong," Ethan countered, not taking his eyes off the woods. I tried to find a scientific explanation. "It could be an early stage of ecosystem development," I recorded into my wrist-mounted log. "Perhaps complex animal life simply hasn't evolved yet, or the dominant life forms communicate on a frequency we can't perceive." My words sounded hollow, even to me. A planet this lush, this vibrant, this alive, should have been screaming with noise. This was the green silence. We began the deployment of the Oasis 1 base modules. The automated systems worked flawlessly. The habitat module unfolded with a series of satisfying clicks and hisses, its white composite walls a stark contrast to the living world around it. The solar arrays unfurled like metallic wings, tilting to catch the light of the distant red dwarf star. The science lab, the med bay, the comms tower, it all went up without a single hitch. Everything was going perfectly, suspiciously so. As the sun began to set, casting long, strange shadows through the glowing forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't colonists, we were intruders, and the silence was not peace. It was the held breath of something waiting. The first few days on Providence were a scientist's dream. Every sample we collected presented a fresh set of beautiful, baffling data. I spent 18 hours a day in the lab, a sterile bubble of chrome and white light, trying to unravel the planet's secrets. The flora was the most fascinating. Under the electron microscope, the cellular structure of a simple leaf was a masterpiece of biological engineering. "Look at this," I said, motioning Noah over to my monitor. On the screen was the magnified image of a plant cell's chloroplast. There's almost no junk DNA. The genetic code is elegant. It's impossibly efficient. It's like millions of years of evolution took a shortcut and arrived at perfection. He leaned in, his eyes wide. "It's like it was designed." "Don't say that," I said, a little too sharply. "It's convergent evolution on a planetary scale. The environmental pressures here must be so unique, so specific, that they forced all life to develop along this single optimal path." I was trying to convince myself as much as him. "But Claire, it's not just one path, it's the same path," he insisted, pulling up his own screen. He had been mapping the planet's surface with the Pioneer 7's long-range sensors. "Look," he displayed a topographical map of our continent. Then he overlaid a map of the floral distribution, then a geological survey of the soil composition. With each new layer, a pattern emerged, a delicate, swirling, intricate design that repeated itself over and over, from the curve of a mountain range to the placement of the glowing trees. It was a fractal.
"The patterns on the ground," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They match the veining on the leaves. The macro reflects the micro. The entire planet is a single repeating pattern." That's when Ethan and Owen walked into the lab. Ethan had just returned from a perimeter patrol, his face set in its usual grim lines. Owen was carrying a medical kit. "Find any boogeymen, Walker?" Noah asked, trying to lighten the mood. "No," Ethan said, his gaze fixed on Noah's screen. "Just more of this. Order, symmetry. It feels manufactured, unnatural." "I'm not sure I'd call it unnatural, Ethan," Owen said calmly, his psychologist's mind always seeking balance. "Nature is full of patterns. The nautilus shell, the snowflake, the sunflower." "Not on this scale," Ethan shot back. "This isn't a sunflower, Doc. This is a blueprint. And I don't like not knowing who the architect is." The debate became a regular feature of our evenings. It was a clash of worldviews. I argued for science and rational explanation. Noah saw divine or alien artistry. Ethan saw a perfectly designed kill box. And Owen, ever the observer, simply listened, a thoughtful expression on his face. The incident happened on the 5th day. We were on a sample-gathering expedition about a half-mile from the base. Owen was cataloging a species of plant that looked uncannily like a terrestrial orchid, except it was the color of polished obsidian and stood 3 feet tall. Its petals had the texture of velvet. "Fascinating," he murmured, leaning in close with his scanner. "It seems to absorb all light that hits it. No reflective properties at all." He reached out to touch a petal, a breach of protocol, but I understood the impulse. The thing was mesmerizing. As he did, his foot slipped on the dampened moss. He threw out his hand to catch himself, and it brushed against the stem of the flower. A sharp hiss of pain. He jerked his hand back. "Damn!" A thin black thorn, no bigger than a sewing needle, had pierced the glove and the skin of his palm. A single drop of crimson blood welled up, looking shockingly out of place against the black velvet of the flower. "Owen, are you all right?" I asked, rushing over. "I'm fine, Claire, just clumsy," he said, pulling off his glove. "It's just a scratch." Ethan was there in a second. "Let me see that. Anything from this place could be toxic." Owen held up his hand. The puncture wound was small, barely visible, but as we watched, something incredible happened. The skin around the wound seemed to knit itself together. The tiny bead of blood was reabsorbed. Within 30 seconds, there was no mark at all. Not a scratch, not a scar. The skin was perfectly smooth, if a little flushed. We all stared in stunned silence. "Well," Owen said, flexing his fingers, "that's irrecarcable. It doesn't even hurt." He looked at the black orchid with a new sense of wonder. "Remarkable regenerative properties." "We're going back to the base, now," Ethan ordered, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. "You're spending the next 24 hours in the medbay, Doc. No arguments." For once, no one argued with him. As we walked back through the silent, glowing forest, I kept looking over my shoulder. The beauty of the place had begun to feel menacing. Perfection is a sterile concept. Nature, true nature, is messy, chaotic, and full of flaws. This place
had no flaws. And the thought occurred to me, with a cold spike of dread, that maybe we were the first flaw to be introduced, and that the perfect, silent garden around us was already working on a way to correct the error. Owen Brooks was a man of routine. Every morning at 0600, he would be in the small galley, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a text on behavioral psychology. But on the morning after his accident, he wasn't there. I found him in the observation dome, standing perfectly still, his hands pressed against the transparent aluminum. He was staring out at the forest, which was bathed in the soft red light of the rising star. "Owen, are you all right?" I asked. "I'm fantastic, Claire. I feel energized." He held up his hand, the one that had been pricked by the thorn. "Not a mark. In fact," he trailed off, looking at his own skin with a kind of detached curiosity. I stepped closer. At first, I didn't see it. Then the light caught his skin just right. Beneath the surface, there was a faint, almost imperceptible mottling of green. It wasn't a rash or a bruise. It was in the tissue itself, a delicate, web-like pattern that looked disturbingly like the veins on a leaf. "My skin feels thirsty," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It wants the light." My own blood ran cold. "Oh, and I need you in the med bay. I need a blood sample, now." This time, he didn't resist. He seemed to float back to the lab, his movements languid and strangely graceful. As I prepared the syringe, he just kept staring out the nearest viewport, a small, placid smile on his face. The results under the microscope were the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. His red blood cells were intact, but they were swarming with something else. Tiny, seed-like organisms with pulsating tails. They weren't attacking his cells, not in the way a normal virus would. They were latching onto them, piercing the cell walls and injecting a shimmering strand of their own genetic material. They were rewriting him. It wasn't a poison, it was a conversion, a terraforming of the human body. I stumbled back from the microscope. A hand clapped over my mouth. I felt a wave of nausea. At that moment, Noah called out from the main lab, "Claire, you need to see this. I think I've found it." I left Owen sitting placidly in the medbay and hurried to Noah's station. He had the fractal maps on the main screen again, but this time he had them in motion. A time-lapse animation compiled from the orbital scans. "The patterns aren't static," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "They're growing, slowly, very slowly, but look." He pointed to a section of the map hundreds of miles to the north. The geological surveys showed a massive iron deposit here. 6 days ago, this whole area was just rock and thin soil. He sped up the animation. On the screen, we watched as the vegetation pattern, that same swirling, intricate design, flowed over the barren land like a slow-motion green tide. The soil composition changed. The plant life took root. It wasn't just growing, it was cultivating. It was preparing the soil, planting itself, and spreading in a way that was deliberate and intelligent. The pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The impossibly perfect DNA, the fractal landscape, the intelligent, terraforming growth, and the virus in Owen's blood rewriting him from the inside out. My voice was a choked whisper. "It's not a wild planet." Noah turned to look at me, his face pale. "What?"
We're not the first intelligent life to find providence, I said, the horror of the realization washing over me. We're just trespassing. This whole world, it's been cultivated, engineered. We're not in a jungle, Noah. I looked from the map on the screen to the silent glowing trees outside. We're in someone's garden. The silence that followed was heavy, profound. The name came to me, unbidden, a perfect descriptor for the vast, silent, patient intelligence that had shaped this world. The gardener, I breathed. Ethan, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. His face was a mask of cold fury. Then it's time we put up a no trespassing sign. He keyed his comm. All hands. From this moment, we are on full security alert. Perimeter defenses are to be activated. No one leaves the base without my direct authorization. We are treating this entire planet as a hostile entity. From the medbay, a voice drifted out, soft and serene. It was Owen. He was still staring out the window, his green mottled hand pressed against the glass. He doesn't want to hurt us, he whispered, a strange resonant quality to his voice. He's just tending to his prize specimens. His head turned, and his eyes, now with a faint greenish tint to the irises, found mine. A beatific smile spread across his face. He wants to plant us. The transformation accelerated. Owen's humanity began to peel away in layers like old wallpaper. Within 48 hours, the green mottling on his skin had deepened into a solid, chlorophyll-rich hue. His skin lost its soft texture, becoming firm and smooth like the waxy surface of a leaf. He refused food, claiming he wasn't hungry, and spent all his time pressed against the viewports soaking in the light. He was photosynthesizing. His vital signs are bizarre, I told Ethan, watching the readouts from the med bay, where we'd been forced to confine him. Respiration and heart rate are at near zero, but his cellular energy production is off the charts. He's healthier than any of us. He's not one of us anymore, Ethan said grimly, watching the security feed. On the screen, Owen stood with his back to the camera. As we watched, he slowly raised his hand. His fingers, once blunt and human, had elongated. They were tapering to fine points, and from the very tips, tiny pale green shoots were unfurling like the first leaves of a seedling. It was a grotesque parody of life. The first attack came that night. I was jolted from a restless sleep by the wail of the proximity alarm. I scrambled out of my bunk, pulling on my jumpsuit, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What is it?" I yelled, running into the command center. "Perimeter breach, Sector Gamma," Ethan barked, his eyes glued to the monitors. "Multiple contacts, but they're not moving like animals." On the screen, the infrared cameras showed nothing, just the glowing trees and the still landscape. But the sensor grid was lit up like a Christmas tree. The pressure plates around the base were being triggered one after another, as if by 100 invisible feet. "They're underground," Noah said, his fingers flying across his console. "The seismic sensors are going crazy. They're coming up from below." A loud, metallic screech echoed from the direction of the ventilation shaft in the main corridor. It was followed by a wet, tearing sound. A thick, dark green vine, covered in what looked like Owen's black orchid thorns, punched through the metal grating as if it were tissue paper. It whipped through the air, probing, searching. "Fire!" Ethan yelled. The base's internal turrets swiveled and spat streams of superheated plasma. The vine recoiled with a sound like sizzling meat, leaving the scent of burnt sugar and chlorophyll in the air. But another one immediately punched through the floor plates nearby, and another through the ceiling panel. "They're in the walls," Hannah shouted, backing away from a conduit that was beginning to bulge and warp. This wasn't a chaotic assault. It was systematic. They were targeting weak points, vents, utility conduits, junction boxes, the places a human engineer would identify as vulnerable. The planet wasn't just alive. It was smart. It had been watching us. It had learned the layout of our base. Ethan grabbed a portable plasma cutter from the emergency locker. Fall back to the central hub, seal the blast doors. He stood his ground in the corridor, a lone figure against the encroaching jungle. He aimed the cutter and fired a brilliant white beam, carving through the vines. They writhed and smoked, but for every one he severed, 2 more seemed to take its place. They were pouring into our sterile habitat, bringing the silent green world inside with them. The silence was now broken, filled with the tearing of metal, the hiss of plasma, and a strange low rustling sound that seemed to come from the plants themselves, a sound of immense collective effort. We scrambled back into the command center, and Noah slammed his hand down on the controls to seal the main blast door. It slid shut with a heavy, final thud, cutting off the sight of Ethan battling the writhing green tendrils. "He's trapped out there!" I screamed.
"He's buying us time," Hannah said, her face pale but her voice firm. "What's the plan, Claire?" I stared at the sealed door, my mind racing. The planet was aware of us. It knew our technology, our architecture. It wasn't just a mindless force of nature. It was an intelligence, and it perceived us as an infection, a foreign body to be purged. We had locked the door, but we all knew it was a temporary measure. The garden was reclaiming its soil, and we were standing on it. The gardener was simply weeding his plot, and we were the weeds. A moment later, the comms crackled to life. It was Ethan's voice, ragged and out of breath. "Corridor is clear, for now. The plasma cutter works, but it's like trying to stop the tide with a bucket. They're everywhere." The base, our perfect little oasis of human ingenuity, had become a cage, and the bars were made of living, growing, intelligent green. In the suffocating quiet that followed the attack, I threw myself back into the only thing that made sense: the science. While Ethan and Hannah worked on reinforcing the blast doors and welding shut the compromised vents, I took one of the severed vine sections back to the lab. I had to understand the weapon being used against us. Under the microscope, the truth was even more horrifying than I'd imagined. The vine cells were a hybrid. They contained the same ruthlessly efficient chloroplasts as the native flora, but they were integrated with something else: humanoid neural cells. The DNA was a braided helix of plant and Owen Brooks. My blood ran cold. The planet hadn't just used his body as fertilizer, it had incorporated him. It had read his genetic code, his cellular structure, and was now using that information to create a new form of life, one perfectly adapted to fighting us. It had taken our biologist and turned him into its biological weapon. "It's not killing him," I said aloud, the words tasting like ash. "It's integrating him." This wasn't a war for territory. It was a hostile takeover at the genetic level. The gardener didn't want to destroy us. It wanted to absorb us, to add our unique looking at his planetary library. My thoughts were interrupted by a frantic call from Noah. "Claire, you have to get to the command center, right now." I found him staring at the main geological display, his face ashen. He had linked the seismic sensors to a deep radar scanner, creating a 3-dimensional map of the planet's crust beneath us. What it showed was impossible. "It's not a root system," he whispered, pointing at the screen. "It's
A brain. Beneath our feet, stretching for miles in every direction, was a network of what looked like colossal roots. But they weren't just roots. They were interconnected, pulsing with a steady, low-frequency energy. We could see nodes, ganglions, vast clusters of neural activity. When one of our perimeter sensors was triggered, a ripple of light would race through the entire network, converging on our location. The entire forest, perhaps the entire planet, was a single superorganism, a collective consciousness with a mind the size of a continent. "It's been studying us since the moment we landed," Noah said, tracing a line of energy on the screen. "Every step we take, every signal we transmit, every sample we drill, it feels it. It processes it. We were like a new toy for a curious, ancient child. At first, it had simply observed. It let us set up our base, go about our routines, believing we were in control. It watched Owen touch the orchid, felt the prick of the thorn, and saw an opportunity. It had taken him not as an act of aggression, but of curiosity. What is this thing? How does it work? How can I make it part of me? The attack on the base wasn't malice. It was the next stage of the experiment. It was the gardener reaching into the terrarium to move the ants around. A low, rustling voice suddenly filled the command center, coming from the internal comms system. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, but it formed words. Owen's words. "It is so quiet in here. So much space between the atoms. Out here, we are all one. We are all connected. There is no I. There is only green." Ethan stormed into the room. How is he on the comms? Noah's face was a mask of terror. He's not just on the comms. He's in the system. The vines, they're not just muscle, they're conductive. They've tapped into the base's main conduits. He's interfacing with the central computer. The lights in the command center flickered. On the main screen, the schematic of the base appeared. One by one, internal systems began to flash red, then green. Life support, power distribution, door controls. He's not just in the computer, he is the computer. He's a part of the base now, just like he's a part of the planet. The voice came again, calmer this time, filled with a terrible, serene pity. "You try so hard to keep the world out. You build walls of metal and plastic, but the garden always finds a way in. It's time to open the doors. It's time to be planted." The planetary network on Noah's screen began to glow, the light pulsing faster and faster. The seismic vibrations grew stronger, a deep, resonant hum that we could feel in the soles of our feet, in the marrow of our bones. The planet was focusing its attention. The experiment was over. It had learned all it needed to know. Ethan Walker was not a man who tolerated being caged. For 2 days, we'd been trapped inside the habitat, listening to the constant, subtle rustle of the vines moving within the walls and the serene, maddening whispers of what used to be Owen over the comms. Ethan's patience had evaporated. "That's it. I'm done with this," he declared, slamming a fist on the tactical table. The holographic display flickered. "We can't just sit here and wait for this thing to turn our home into a giant flower pot. We need to show it that we're not just another passive specimen. We need to show it we can bite back." "And how do you propose we do that, Ethan?" I asked, my nerves frayed. "We're outgunned by the grass." "We're not outgunned. We've just been using the wrong weapons," he countered, his eyes gleaming with a hard, desperate light. He pulled up a schematic of the base's all-terrain rover, the Badger. The Badger's fuel cells use a hypergolic mixture, highly volatile. We load up the secondary tanks, drive a half-mile into that glowing freak show, and start a fire it can't ignore. We'll create a burn zone so hot, so toxic, that nothing will grow there for a decade. We need to show the gardener that we are not a crop. We are a poison. It was a mariner's solution. Overwhelming, disproportionate force. It was also reckless and terrified me. You'll only make it angrier. Good, he snarled. I want it angry. I can fight angry. I can't fight this silent, creeping cultivation. He wouldn't be dissuaded. He needed an enemy he could see, a target he could shoot. Hannah, ever the pragmatist and itching for action, agreed to drive. Better than sitting here listening to Dr. Doolittle's plant impression, she grumbled, grabbing her flight jacket. I watched them on the security monitors as they prepped the Badger in the vehicle bay. The rover was a beast, 12 feet tall with 6 independently articulating wheels designed to cross any terrain. They loaded the spare fuel tanks, their movements efficient and grim. They were going to war with a forest. Opening the bay doors, Hannah's voice came over the comm. Wish us luck. The massive doors groaned open, revealing the forest, which seemed to watch them with a million silent, leafy eyes. The air that wafted in was thick with the scent of pollen. Hannah gunned the engine, and the Badger roared out of the bay, its heavy treads chewing up the iridescent moss.
For the first few minutes, it seemed to be working. The Badger plowed through the undergrowth, its floodlights cutting swaths through the gloom between the glowing trees. Ethan was in the passenger seat, his plasma rifle at the ready. Target area is a quarter-mile ahead, Hannah reported. Everything's quiet out here. Too quiet. That was when the forest responded. It wasn't a sudden, monstrous attack. It was a coordinated, tactical maneuver. The ground ahead of the Badger suddenly softened, turning from firm soil to a sucking mire. The rover's wheels spun, digging themselves deeper. "What the hell?" Hannah yelled, trying to reverse. "The ground's turning to quicksand." Then the roots came. Not small vines, but massive, python-thick roots that erupted from the soil around them. They weren't fast or whip-like. They moved with the slow, inexorable power of a hydraulic press. One wrapped around a forward wheel axle, and we heard a high-pitched screech of protesting metal. Another slammed down on the rover's roof, leaving a massive dent. "Ethan, get out of there!" I screamed into the comms. "Trying!" he yelled back, firing his plasma rifle out the window. The beam sliced through the roots, which sizzled and smoked, but more rose up to take their place. They weren't trying to kill them. They were disabling their technology, systematically. A thick, woody tendril, studded with black thorns, smashed through the armored windshield. Hannah screamed. We saw her swatting at it, trying to keep it away from the controls. "We're getting out," Ethan shouted. The video feed cut out as another root crushed the external camera array. "Hannah's hit. We're on foot, heading back to base." The comms went dead. For 10 agonizing minutes, we had nothing. Just static and the rustling whispers of Owen from the speakers. "The gardener does not like hire. Weeds must be pulled." Then we saw them. 2 figures stumbling out of the tree line. Ethan was practically carrying Hannah, who was clutching her arm, her sleeve soaked in blood. They staggered across the clearing and collapsed through the main airlock just as a phalanx of thick roots burst from the ground where they had been moments before. I helped Ethan get her to the medbay. Her arm had been pierced in a dozen places by the thorns. The wounds were already beginning to close, but the skin around them had taken on that telltale, sickly green hue. Ethan slumped against a wall, covered in mud and sap, his face a mask of defeat and horror. He had gone out there to prove we were the dominant species,
the masters of our own destiny. He had returned with a terrifying new understanding. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a truth he could no longer deny. "We made a mistake, Claire," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We're not the weeds." He looked at Hannah's arm where the green was slowly spreading. "We're the harvest." The failed attack broke something in us. Ethan's fiery defiance was replaced by a grim, coiled vigilance. Hannah was confined to the medbay, her transformation progressing faster than Owen's had. The wounds on her arm had healed into smooth, bark-like patches, and she stared for hours at the ceiling, occasionally murmuring things about the sky and the wind. The rest of us, me and Noah, were trapped in a state of quiet, gnawing dread. The gardener's strategy changed. It no longer needed to break down the doors. It had found a more insidious way in. A fine, glittering golden dust began to coat every external surface of the base. Pollen. It was so fine that the air filtration systems, designed to block microbes and industrial contaminants, couldn't stop it. It began to circulate through the vents, silent and invisible. We were breathing in the planet. That's when the dreams started. The first one was disorienting. I wasn't myself. I was taller, immensely so. My feet were deep in cool, damp earth, 1,000 tiny tendrils pulling nutrients from the soil. My arms were branches, broad and covered in leaves, stretching up towards a warm red sun. I could feel the light on my skin, my bark, and the slow, sweet process of turning that light into life. I felt a profound sense of peace, of rightness. There was no thought, no anxiety, just a slow, patient, rooted existence. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, the sheets damp with sweat. It had felt more real than my own waking life. At breakfast, I found Noah staring into his coffee, his face pale.
"Bad night?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes wide and haunted. "I dreamed I was a flower," he whispered. "A big, purple one. I could feel the dew on my petals. I could feel myself tracking the sun across the sky. Is that crazy?" It wasn't crazy. It was happening to both of us. The pollen was a psychotropic agent, a key designed to unlock a specific part of our consciousness and attune it to the planet's. Every night, the dreams became more vivid, more immersive. We experienced life as a towering, glowing tree, as a patch of iridescent moss, as a single blade of alien grass. We felt the rain. We felt the wind. We felt the slow, unyielding passage of seasons. And in the dreams, we felt him, the gardener. It wasn't a being of flesh and blood. It had no face, no voice. It was a presence, a vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent consciousness that permeated everything. It was the planet, and the planet was it. In our green dreams, we could feel its attention as a slow, sweeping current, like the tide. It was tending to its creation, its thoughts as slow as tectonic plates, its emotions as alien as the dark side of the moon. We weren't individuals to it. We weren't Claire or Noah. We were simply new, a new and interesting type of flora it had acquired. It was studying our fear, our ambition, our love, our grief, not as emotions, but as complex chemical reactions, curious new traits to be analyzed and, perhaps, incorporated into future generations of its children. Our struggle for survival was, to the gardener, no more significant than a sunflower turning to face the light. One night, the dream was different.
I was still rooted in the earth, part of the great green hole, but I could see through other eyes. I saw the Pioneer 7 in orbit, a silver seed against the black soil of space. I saw our base, Oasis 1, a sterile white blemish on the perfect green skin of the world. And I felt the gardener's intent, a feeling that translated into my human mind as a single clear thought, devoid of malice or anger. It was a simple agricultural imperative. The new specimens have been fully analyzed. They are hardy, adaptable, and replicate quickly. They are ready for propagation. It is time for the harvest. I woke up with a scream lodged in my throat. Across the room, Noah was sitting bolt upright in his bunk, his eyes wide with the same terror. He had seen it too. We were no longer just dreaming the life of the plants. We were now dreaming the thoughts of the gardener. And we knew what was coming next. The base was suddenly plunged into darkness. The hum of the life support systems died, replaced by the deep, resonant thrum of the planetary consciousness that we could now feel even while awake.
Over the comms, a chorus of voices whispered in unison. It was Owen's voice and Hannah's, intertwined with 1,000 other rustling, leafy sounds. The harvest moon is rising. The time has come to reap what has been sown. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the eerie green glow of the forest filtering through the viewports. The emergency lights flickered once, then died. "He's cut the power!" Noah yelled, his voice tight with panic. He fumbled for a flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. "Owen, it has total control of the primary systems." "Secondary power," I shouted, my command instincts kicking in over the terror. "Get the batteries online." "I'm trying." Noah's fingers flew over a manual control panel. "But he's fighting me. It's like the ship's own nervous system is rejecting the commands." A loud, shuddering bang echoed from the direction of the science lab. It sounded like the hull was being breached. A moment later, we heard a slithering, dragging sound from the vents above our heads. Ethan was a ghost in the darkness, his face illuminated only by the tactical light mounted on his plasma rifle. "They're coming from everywhere. We're not keeping them out this time." He was right. This was not a probe or an experiment. This was the final overwhelming push. This was the harvest. Suddenly, a section of the floor plating in the corridor buckled upwards. With a deafening shriek of tearing metal, a massive thorned vine, as thick as a man's torso, punched through. But it was what came with it that made Noah scream. Entwined with the vine were dozens of thick black cables, power conduits, fiber optic lines. They were moving with the vine, acting as a part of it, a grotesque fusion of technology and biology. The hybrid tendril lashed out, not at us, but at Noah's engineering console. The cables, acting like metallic tentacles, plunged into the ports, interfacing directly. Sparks flew. The console went dead. "He's locked us out completely," Noah cried, stumbling backward. That's when another one appeared. From a hole torn in the ceiling, a different kind of appendage descended. It looked less like a vine and more like a bundle of living wires, woven together into a single prehensile limb. It dropped down with lightning speed and wrapped around Noah's waist. He let out a strangled cry. "Claire! Noah!" I lunged forward, but Ethan grabbed my arm, holding me back. "Don't! You can't help him." The cable vine was impossibly strong. It lifted Noah off his feet as if he weighed nothing. He scrabbled at it, his flashlight dropping and rolling across the floor, its beam spinning wildly. The vine contracted, pulling him upwards, dragging him towards the gaping, dark hole in the ceiling. "It's pulling me in!" he shrieked, his voice filled with a terror so pure it was almost inhuman. We watched, helpless, as he was drawn into the dark space between the inner and outer hull, into the nest of living machinery the planet had built inside our walls. His screams were cut off with a sickening, wet crunch, and then silence. The main viewport in the command center began to crack. A starburst pattern spread across the transparent aluminum as something outside pushed against it with immense, patient force. And then the blast door to the medbay slid open with a smooth, silent hiss. Standing in the doorway was Owen, or what was left of him. He was taller now, his limbs elongated and woody. His skin was the texture of rough bark covered in a fine layer of green moss. His face was a mask of hardened lignin, but his eyes, his human eyes, were still visible deep within the woody sockets, glowing with a soft green light. He was no longer just a man turning into a plant. He was an avatar of the forest, a high priest of the green silence. Behind him, Hannah stirred. From her cot, not one but two new forms were rising. The biomass of her body had been repurposed, split into two lurching, vaguely humanoid shapes made of woven vines and pulsing fleshy tubers that mimicked organs. She was no longer a person, she was a nursery. "The doors are open," Owen's rustling voice echoed through the room, though his mouth did not move. "The gardener welcomes you. It is time to be replanted. It is time to join the song." The main viewport in the command center finally gave way, shattering inwards with a sound like a thunderclap. A flood of vines, pollen, and thick, sweet-smelling leaves poured into the command center. The harvest had begun in earnest. "The stork! We have to get to the stork!" I yelled over the cacophony of shattering glass and tearing metal. It was our only way out, a tiny lifeboat in a raging green ocean. Ethan didn't need convincing. He laid down a suppressing fire with his plasma rifle, the brilliant white bolts carving smoking tunnels through the mass of invading flora. "Go! I'll cover you!" We ran. The corridors of Oasis 1, once a testament to human order, were now a nightmarish greenhouse. The walls were covered in a lattice of pulsing, root-like veins. The air was so thick with golden pollen, it was like breathing dust. Strange, bioluminescent fungi sprouted from the floor panels, casting a sickly, chartreuse light on the scene. We rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The path to the vehicle bay, where the lander was docked, was blocked. The two creatures that had grown from Hannah's biomass stood there, swaying gently. They were horrible parodies of the human form, their vine and tuber bodies constantly shifting and reforming. They had no faces, but we could feel their attention on us, a cold, botanical curiosity. "Get back!" Ethan shouted, shoving me behind him. He leveled his rifle, but before he could fire, the creature on the left raised a limb. A volley of thorns, hard and black as obsidian, shot from its appendage, embedding themselves in the wall next to Ethan's head with sharp thwips. "The other way!" I screamed, pulling him back. "Through the mess hall!" We scrambled down a parallel corridor, the rustling sounds of the Hannah things close behind us. The mess hall was even worse. The large observation window that ran the length of the room had been completely overgrown. A single colossal plant, like a Venus flytrap the size of a car, pulsed in the center of the room, its mouth lined with dagger-like thorns. It snapped shut on a twisted piece of a table as we ran past. We were almost to the vehicle bay airlock when he appeared, blocking our path. Owen. He moved with an unnatural, gliding grace, his woody feet making no sound on the metal deck. He was no longer just a plant in the shape of a man. He was a monster.
His back had split open, and from the chasm, a writhing mass of roots and tendrils fanned out like a peacock's tail made of living wood. His glowing green eyes fixed on us. "You cannot leave the garden. The seed must not be lost." Behind us, the Hanathane shambled into the corridor, cutting off our retreat. We were trapped. Ethan looked at me, his face grim but resolute. In the eerie green light, I saw the man he was, stripped of all protocol and paranoia, a soldier with one last fight in him. "Claire," he said, his voice low and steady, "when I give the signal, you run. Don't look back. Just get to that lander and get the hell off this rock." "Ethan, no!" "That's an order, Commander," he said, a sad ghost of a smile on his lips. He unclipped 2 grenades from his belt, not fragmentation grenades, but the incendiary plasma charges for emergency demolitions. He armed them both.
"Hey, Brooks!" he yelled at the monster that had been our friend. "You want to plant something? Plant this!" He charged. Owen, the gardener's puppet, reacted with incredible speed, its root tail lashing out like a dozen whips. They wrapped around Ethan's arms and legs, lifting him into the air. But it was too late. He had already shoved the armed grenades deep into the woody fissure on the creature's back. "Run, Claire!" was the last thing he yelled. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted for the airlock, not daring to look back. I heard a muffled sizzling sound, and then a flash of white light so brilliant it bleached all the color from the world. The shockwave threw me through the airlock door and onto the deck of the vehicle bay. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing. The corridor behind me was gone, replaced by a roaring inferno of white-hot plasma. The creature that was Owen had been vaporized, and the flames were consuming the Hanathings and everything else. Ethan was gone. His sacrifice had bought me a few precious seconds. I slammed the control to cycle the inner airlock, sealing the fire behind me. I scrambled up the ramp of the Stork, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I threw myself into the pilot's seat, Hannah's seat, and my hands flew across the controls, muscle memory from years of training taking over. "Pioneer 7, this is Dawson. Emergency departure. I'm coming up hot." The lander's engines roared to life. Through the forward viewport, I could see the bay doors beginning to close, thick vines forcing them shut. I didn't wait for clearance. I slammed the throttle forward, and the Stork leapt into the air, blasting through the partially closed doors with a horrific screech of metal. I was free. I was alive. And I was utterly, completely alone. The silence of space was a deafening roar after the chaos of the base. As the Stork clawed its way into orbit, I allowed myself to collapse back into the pilot's seat, my body trembling with adrenaline and grief. Noah, Ethan, Owen, Hannah, all gone, consumed by the garden. I was the sole survivor of Oasis 1. I completed the docking procedure with the Pioneer 7 on autopilot, my movements robotic. Once the airlock was secure, I floated from the lander into the cold, quiet command deck of the mothership. It was pristine, sterile, a ghost ship waiting for a crew that would never return. I drifted to the main observation port, the one we had all crowded around in breathless wonder just a few weeks ago. I looked down at Providence. From this vantage point, I could see no sign of the horror, no trace of our failed colony. There was only the endless, serene, unbroken blanket of green. But as I watched, something began to happen on the surface. The forest was moving, not in a chaotic, aggressive way, but with a slow, deliberate artistry. Entire continents of trees were shifting, their glowing bark creating new patterns on the planet's face. Miles-wide swaths of iridescent flowers bloomed in unison, their colors swirling. The fractal patterns Noah had discovered were rearranging themselves. Over the course of an hour, the planet painted a new picture. The forests and fields, the mountains and valleys, all coalesced into a single planetary-scale image.
a gigantic, intricate, beautiful funeral wreath. It was a monument, a memorial, a final, silent statement from the gardener, a tribute not to us, but to its own flawlessly executed act of absorption. A profound, chilling loneliness washed over me. I was a meaningless speck, a forgotten microbe that had managed to escape the petri dish. I turned away from the window, unable to look any longer. My mission now was simple: survive, get back to Earth, warn them. I went to the navigation console. The ship was fully functional. The trip home would take years in cryosleep, but it was possible. I plotted the course, my hands steady now. I had a purpose. I would be the messenger. I would not let their sacrifices be for nothing. Course locked. I initiated the startup sequence for the main drive. As the ship's systems hummed to life around me, I felt a small, sharp itch on the back of my left hand. I absently went to scratch it, and my eyes fell on the spot. A thin red line, about an inch long. A scratch. I must have gotten it during the escape, maybe on a piece of shrapnel when the viewport blew. It wasn't bleeding, it didn't even hurt, but it was there. A cold, familiar dread, heavier than any gravity, settled in my gut. I stumbled to the medbay, my own medbay, the one where I had first seen the change in Owen. My hands trembled as I prepped a slide and took a dermal scraping from the edge of the scratch. I placed the slide under the electron microscope, the same one where I had made my horrifying discovery about the virus. I leaned in and adjusted the focus.
For a moment, I saw only my own healthy, familiar cells. Then I saw it. A single, tiny, seed-like organism latched onto one of my skin cells, and as I watched, paralyzed with a terror beyond all comprehension, it pierced the cell wall and injected a shimmering green strand of new DNA. And then I saw another, and another. They were already replicating. The plasma explosion, the fire, the heat must have aerosolized the organic material, the very essence of the gardener's virus. I had breathed it in. It was inside me. The Pioneer 7's engine began to hum, a deep vibration that resonated through the deck. The ship was ready. It was aimed at a small blue-green planet half a galaxy away, a planet teeming with life, a planet that was messy, chaotic, and imperfect, a virgin world waiting to be cultivated. I looked from the microscope to my own hand. The scratch was gone. In its place, under the skin, I could see the faintest web-like tracery of green. The ship began to move, accelerating on its long journey home, but it was no longer a rescue vessel. It was no longer a ship. It was a seed, and the gardener was expanding his garden.